Welcome to The Living Narrative, a podcast with a mission to open the hearts of millions by sharing stories of people, projects, and positive changes happening around the world. So much of the meaning that we find comes from people who are doing work that inspires. I hope you'll find this podcast inspiring. There will be many wonderful guests on this podcast, and I figured I would kick off the first show with a solo episode. As a quick side note, I'm all about taking inspired action and figuring things out along the way. So I hope the sound quality is good for this podcast, and I'm going to learn what kind of equipment and software I need to make it even better along the way. So just before I share my intimate stories, I'm going to tell you what I mean by the story you tell becomes the life you live. As a hypnotherapist and pleasure coach, I help men and women get turned on by their lives by transforming their story so that they can follow their soul calling, have a lot more fun, and create deeply fulfilling relationships. As you'll soon hear when I share my story, I tried a lot of different healing modalities throughout my life because I just wanted to feel happy, and at the very least, I just wanted to stop feeling anxious and depressed. Counseling, books, podcasts, courses, affirmations, the latest manifesting technique, you name it. And while those things kind of made me feel a little bit better, they never really honestly made a significant change in my life. And I'm going to tell you why. You can spend years in talk therapy without really making any real progress. And that's because most of that kind of therapy stays at the level of the conscious mind. So you're aware of it, you're talking about your story, you can talk about your problems all day long, but rehearsing those problems and rehearsing the same old story doesn't help you to change your life. And most of the things that hold you back in life are these unconscious stories that you're holding onto from the past. The unconscious part of your mind drives more than 80% of your habits and behaviors. So when you change the belief systems and the stories on this level, you can instantly shift things that you were not even aware were sabotaging you. So let me give you an example. I recently worked with this woman, Carrie, who spent the last 10 years in therapy, and she'd been recently trying tapping in order to feel more confident. We actually got to the root of her issue in one session. And what we discovered was actually keeping her from being visible in her business. These stories from her childhood where she had to be a good girl, a quiet girl, she needed to behave, to not be seen or heard, she couldn't talk with the adults, she had to be in her room, and she had to be a really proper girl. And then there was another situation when she was about 13, when she was developing breasts, and one of her teachers made a comment about being able to see her nipples through her shirt and that she should cover herself up and that it was inappropriate. So she was shamed for her body and she was constantly told to not be seen or heard growing up. And so she held on to these beliefs even as an adult, and they were stopping her from being visible in her business. So we cleared those beliefs from her system and planted new powerful stories in her subconscious mind. That her body is beautiful, that her gifts are important, her presence is important, and most importantly, that it is safe to be seen. She made more progress with me in 2 sessions than she did in all of the work she had done previously combined. And now she's about to step on stage for the first time in her business, and she feels absolutely unstoppable. So as you can see, whatever stories you're telling, whether it's on the conscious or the unconscious level, is going to directly affect your life, your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs about yourself. So if you want to change your life, you need to change the stories that you're telling. This is why the story you tell becomes the life you live. And the key to all of this is to get to the root of these stories that mostly don't even belong to you. We've picked them up from our cultures and our society and our parents and the people that we spend a lot of time with. A lot of those things aren't even our original stories. They're other people's. And so when you get to the root of them, you can literally take them out and plant new stories. So let me share with you my story and how the living narrative came to be. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit nervous sharing some of these stories. Some of them, it's the first time I'm going to share them publicly. And yeah, they're very personal, but also really, really important, I think, to share because I know I'm not alone in these experiences. And I know whenever I share my story and it resonates with somebody, that it's an opportunity to bring awareness to the stories we're telling. And that's the first stage to changing them. So thanks for watching. I woke up in the middle of the night and I didn't know where I was. This was our 8th house in 2 years. But the thing that was familiar was the sound of crying and screaming at my bedroom door. I had woken up like this so many times in the first 10 years of my life that this is what felt like home. My dad was an addict, and my mom, she moved us every few months as the money ran out. With every move, it felt like our conditions grew worse, the house smaller and dingier, and inside I grew smaller and dingier. But it wasn't just me. It was my mom. She was in daily bouts of tears and frustration and anger. She was an emotional mess. She was my model of what it was to be a woman, the victim of an out-of-control man. That's where I learned my people-pleasing skills. That's where I forgot my power. One day at another new school, some kids were calling out from behind the bushes. They were like, "Hey, come over here, come try this." I was pretty curious, so I went over and somebody held their hand out, and I was like, "What is that?" And they're like, "Well, it's mushrooms. It'll make you happy." I would do anything to escape the confusion and the pain and the anxiety that I felt. I didn't think twice before just grabbing a handful of mushrooms. I think I grabbed more than 2 handfuls of mushrooms, and I chewed and I chewed and I swallowed. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. Things started to get blurry and spin and spin and spin and spin, and then I broke through this tunnel of light and I could see my life flash before my eyes. I could see all of these stories. I could see all these timelines. I could see these stories that were creating my life. I could see the stories that created my mom's life, how she came to choose my dad, all of these stories that were creating her life, that were attracting all of these abusive boyfriends. But it wasn't just her story. It was my grandmother's story and her grandmother's story, passed on for generations and generations, replaying the same old story over and over and over again. It was terrifying. I was like, well, I'm next. But what I saw in my head was that I could actually change my story. I could see all of these different timelines, all of these different alternate endings depending on what story I would tell. Kind of like those choose your own adventure books. Even though that moment faded, that image was forever etched in my mind. I was only 14 then, and although I had these amazing ideas, I had no idea what to actually do about it. I had no support, no structure, nobody that could actually help me with what I discovered. So I became even more depressed. I was so happy when I got my driver's license. I remember one day when I went out to visit my aunt and I'm driving down the road. I feel so free. It's a summer day, the sun is shining. Just as I'm coming into town, crossing through the first intersection, a car comes in and slams into the side of my car. And then I get crushed between those 2 cars and the car that was stopped at the stoplight. And then I get rear-ended by the one that was behind me. So I'm crushed in between 3 cars. My head is spinning. I have no idea, but it was like time stood still. And again, my life flashed before my eyes. And I could see, like, is this it? Is this all there is to life? It's so hard. I thought, no, this can't be it. There's got to be more to this life. It's a miracle that I walked out of that wreck with nothing more than whiplash. But you know what it was? It was a message. It was a wake-up call. Sometimes messages are delivered in the form of a feather, the tickle of a feather. And if you listen, then you'll get the message. But if you ignore the tickle of the feather, it'll come in like a hurling brick. And if you ignore that, then it comes in like a semi-truck. Smash. That was my semi-truck. I couldn't go on like that any longer. And so in an effort to rehab my back and my neck, I started searching online what to do, and I found this thing called yoga. I had never even really experienced it before, barely ever heard of it. There was no yoga studios in the town that I grew up in. And immediately I knew I had to go there. So at 17, I moved into an ashram and started studying and healing my body and starting to understand that actually I am more than just this body. And I started to discover and understand the secrets of life. I started to understand how I'm a soul having a human experience. I actually felt happy for the first time in my life. But then I returned back to the same town, that small town. There was no yoga studios, and my family was still struggling, and my friends, they were just interested in drinking and partying. Everyone was completely asleep to their power. They had no idea what they were capable of. They had no idea what kind of life existed outside of this small town. I could hardly carry a conversation with anybody. Nobody understood anything I was talking about, and I felt like I was living in a totally different reality than other people. I might as well have been speaking another language. I felt so alone and misunderstood. So I started drinking and partying. I wanted to fit in. Eventually I got a job. I was working hard. I still had that thought of I could change my life, so I worked really, really hard. I got a Jeep, I got a house in the mountains, I started traveling, I went to the best parties. I was living the life. Until one night I was sitting on my living room floor after another long day at work, and I was staring at the bottom of another bottle of wine, and I realized how empty I was. I looked into the mirror. My skin was gray. My eyes were dark. Deep down, I wasn't happy. This isn't my dream. This isn't my life. I'm living somebody else's life. I'm surrounded by people and yet completely and utterly alone. Is this all there is? I knew I had to go deeper. I quit my soul-sucking job. I left the toxic relationship that just constantly reminded me of my mom and her abusive boyfriends. I sold everything and I got back on my quest to figure out who I really am and how to change my story. I went on to study with healers and shamans and teachers all around the world. I finally learned how to activate those alternate endings. And as I changed my story, something really amazing started to happen. My mom and I started having these simultaneous breakthroughs and healing without even realizing it. It was not planned. We would just be on the phone with each other and looking back at what had happened that week, and we would match up our stories of having these downloads or these realizations or these healings, and they would always sync up. And then she started to take these leaps in her life and started really living life for herself. And that's when I realized this wasn't about my story or my mom. This is a human story about remembering who we really are and our own inner power. That's when I realized this is for more than just me. Not only did I change my story, but hidden in the wounds of my past, I discovered my gifts to change other people's stories too. And ever since, I've been going into people's minds, the universe's most complex and beautiful creation, to quickly change and anchor new stories. I have devoted my life to putting an end to disempowering narratives, the ones that I lived growing up, the ones that kept me reaching for anything and anyone outside of myself to try to make me feel better. I barely recognized the woman at the start of this journey. I broke the cycle of a long lineage of women who had forgotten their power. And I have created a completely new story for myself, and it just keeps getting more beautiful and inspiring every single day, because the story is alive, and the story you tell becomes the life you live. I have the honor of helping people transform the stories that they've inherited from their family, from their culture, from the societal conditioning, and from a lifetime of feeling like they're not enough. I've helped my clients turn their wounds into gifts and transform their own stories about money, relationships, sex, family, success, and what it really means to live a life of passion, pleasure, and purpose. You have incredible power to create a life that turns you on. And it all starts with the story that you tell yourself. And I don't know about you, but I believe the world could use a lot more people who are turned on by their lives. I now travel the world creating epic, heart-opening workshops, reminding people of their inherent power to completely transform their story and change their life. I also offer rapid transformational programs online that get massive results for you to change a story in as little as one session. So when you're ready to discover your gifts and activate your power to transform your story, subscribe to this channel and come to thelivingnarrative.com. It's not destined for me or for anybody to keep struggling and living a mediocre life. Your story is alive, and the story you tell becomes the life you live. That's why I create